listening to the Careers BU podcast, a podcast aimed at Bournemouth University students and graduates. Each episode, we talk to employers, alumni and professionals all about their career journey, what employers are looking for, and help you explore the opportunities that are available to you. Hello and welcome to this episode of the Careers BU podcast. I'm Amanda Fripp, Careers Consultant at BU. Today I chat to Dr Kate Atkin. Kate is an inspirational speaker, trainer and author of the book The Imposter Phenomenon. In this episode, Kate dispels some of the myths and misconceptions around imposter phenomenon, such as why it's not a syndrome. Kate talks through how some of those imposter feelings may manifest in the workplace and shares some techniques to help you manage some of those feelings. So whether you're a student, graduate or professional with many years of experience under your belt, this episode is worth a listen. Welcome, Kate. Thank you for coming on today.
I'm delighted to be invited. Thanks, Amanda.
I've bought your book. Currently, I think I'm about 60% of the way through, really enjoying it.
That's lovely to hear.
Can you just introduce yourself, please, and a bit about your background?
Sure. So I am, as you said, author of The Imposter Phenomenon book, which came out in July, I would say this year, but that's 2025, depending upon when someone's listening to it, which is based on my PhD thesis. And I just figured that sometimes, having done a PhD in a particular topic, not everybody wants to read the heavyweight academics. So I wanted to make a difference to individuals in a different way. But how I came about writing that is a far longer story, which I will truncate into something short or aim to. So when I grew up, I wasn't academic. I didn't believe that I was university material, so I didn't go and get a first degree. I then found myself later in life encouraged by my husband to do a master's in positive psychology. And when I turned up to university there in my late 40s, people were surprised to hear you could do a master's without a first degree. And I just had this intense feeling of, I really shouldn't be here. I don't belong. And it was in the course of the first year of doing my MSc that I happened across the work by Pauline Clance and Suzanne Imes on the imposter phenomenon in High Achieving Women, was the title of their paper, published in 1978. I just found I ticked all of the boxes. And so I thought I'd do a bit more research about it for my MSc dissertation, and found that really interesting and intriguing to interview people, and figured that I'd do a little bit more research about it. And 2 years later, after passing or graduating from my MSc, I realized that I wasn't dedicated enough to do the research on my own. So I started what I thought would be a 4-year part-time, and turned out to be 6.5 years, of a PhD thesis looking at this phenomenon and the coping strategies, because I was very surprised to read that in 2017, nobody had published anything on coping strategies at that point in time.
That's really interesting, because we hear a lot about the term, which one of the myths, we hear a lot about the term imposter syndrome, don't we? Lots of people talk about that. But yeah, a lot of the time it's just about having it and not about how to cope with it or how to overcome those feelings. So you became interested in imposter phenomenon and you use that term imposter phenomenon. So tell me about why it shouldn't be called a syndrome. And where did the word, the original research was imposter phenomenon. So where did the word imposter syndrome come from?
Well, there is some early research terming it syndrome, probably, I think it's in the 80s and 90s, but not much. So the odd piece here and there. I think syndrome was probably popularized by the publication of Lean In by Sheryl Sandberg, where she talks about imposter syndrome. It's a much easier word to say. It's far easier to spell. And also, when you look at it from a media perspective, it's much more catchy. You know, depending on how you title this podcast, if you go imposter phenomenon, they'll go, what? Imposter syndrome. It's like, oh, that's a thing that we suffer from. And actually, the difference is really important, because the language that you use around these imposter feelings helps you just at the very beginning to begin to overcome them. So syndrome has a pathological mental health suffer from connotation, whereas in actual fact, phenomenon, as Clance and Imes used in their first coining of the term, is an experience at certain points in time, in certain situations. It's not something you suffer from. It can cause high levels of stress and anxiety, but it's in and of itself, it's the experience that we have of not belonging, of feeling like we're not good enough. And the key thing is, it's despite the external evidence of success. So when you feel like an imposter, it's not about being an imposter.
Yeah. So the terminology is so important, because I think a lot of us, I mean, I have feelings, I think, like this. But yeah, if you start saying, "Oh, I'm suffering from imposter syndrome," then it feels quite fixed, doesn't it? And it feels even more of a barrier to and challenging to overcome. Whereas feelings is something that a lot of people might experience. You said it's despite maybe their achievement. So is imposter phenomenon related to feeling of being a fraud despite being maybe successful, or can literally anyone have these feelings?
So success is in many ways different for different people.
Yeah.
And going back to the original research, Clance and Imes' title was The Imposter Phenomenon in High Achieving Women. So the level of achievement or success, if you want to term it like that, uh, it's you've gone beyond what you thought you would go and do. So for some of the students listening, maybe they were expected to come to university by their parents, family and surroundings, and some may not have been expected to. And when you do something that's unexpected and you are good at it, that can be more of the trigger for imposter feelings than it can be if it was sort of a given that you would do this thing, whatever the thing happens to be. And for me, I grew up on a farm in rural Lincolnshire. Academia was not something that was figured highly in my dad's mind, let's say. And really, the expectation was that one of three girls, one of us would marry a farmer and produce boys, and that just didn't happen to any of us. Um, and it's sort of, you then go and do something beyond childhood expectations, or beyond maybe cultural expectations or societal expectations. That can be some of it. So going beyond, and that success, and it can be, of course it can be academic success, but it can be success in many different forms, and it's whatever that means to you. But the key thing with the imposter feelings is that you're not doing something for the first, second or third time and experiencing normal healthy self-doubt. That's, I think, a really useful thing to have. But when you experience imposter feelings, and they really are true imposter, I really don't feel like I belong. I'm worried that I'm going to get found out. I don't feel like I'm good enough. I shouldn't be here. Then that is despite the external evidence of success. So despite you having already got that track record. So it's different from self-doubt in that respect.
Okay. So, and I guess that's one of the misconceptions, is that I think people maybe talk about imposter phenomenon, or those feelings of feeling like an imposter, but actually it is self-doubt or lack of confidence. So I guess maybe a student who has, is the first in their family to come to university, they may feel a bit of a fraud being at university, which they shouldn't do, but they may. So that is an element of it. But I guess looking at students maybe going into the workplace for the first time, I guess on the whole, it just might be lack of self-confidence, which is completely normal as well for going into a job for the first time.
Yes, absolutely. And it still happens, and that lack of confidence, or the elements of self-doubt, even throughout a career, every time you change jobs, every time you progress or get promoted, those feelings can come back. But I think after about 6 months, once you've got the lie of the land, got an understanding of what you're supposed to be doing, and actually are then doing the job and doing it successfully, doing it well, then that is, if those feelings still persist, that could be, and I'm only using the word could because I really don't like this fact that some people diagnose imposter syndrome either. So I only suggest that it could be, not definitely is, but it could be imposter feelings that some people are experiencing at that point. But you're absolutely right when you mentioned about the confidence piece.
Mm.
There is a very well viewed video that Stephen Bartlett put out talking about stretching your comfort zones and embracing your inner imposter. They are not the same thing. If you stretch your comfort zone, you are doing something new for the first, second, or third time. It's a new thing you're trying out. The imposter feelings come when you've already got the track record. It's no longer new. You already do know what you're doing. You've got the external evidence that says you can do it well, but you haven't internalized that. You haven't allowed yourself to update your inner thinking.
And that's I think, a really important difference, isn't it? Because yes, it's good to, put ourselves outside of our comfort zone and, adopt a growth mindset and do all that sort of thing. But it's two separate things we're kind of talking about here, isn't it? That is different to people who have got to that point of doing what they're meant to be doing, but they're still feeling like
Yes.
they are a fraud.
What went through my mind then, as you were saying, you're still doing it, you still feel like you're a fraud because perhaps, I mean, I was brought up with a little mantra, and some listeners may well also have had this little mantra of do your best. And the do your best is one where it's really meant to be encouraging, but the internalized thinking can be, I've got to keep working at it because it's not my best yet. I could still do it even better. And you keep working, working, working. And then you're not satisfied with what you've done. So you're constantly second guessing yourself, even though other people tell you that it's good enough. It's still sometimes some of the internal thinking that is a little awry, that we haven't thought, well, that's my best piece of work. And when you do a PhD, if anybody listening is thinking about doing a PhD, first of all, a good recommendation is get a comfy chair because you spend a lot of time sitting down in it. But the second recommendation was research something you are interested in, and at some point you have to put your work out there. At some point, you have to send it to supervisors for critiquing, and it's really scary. But when you do it, that's not aimed to be your best work. It's aimed to be one that is good enough, that puts the research out there and says, this is what it is. This is, my piece of work, my findings, but not necessarily this is my best work, because it would have taken me probably 12 years and not 6 to do the PhD if I'd have aimed for the best work possible.
I read that in your book as well, and it made me reframe a little bit, I think, with do your best, because I've got kids as well, and often we just go, just do your best. And actually now it's made me go, oh, but what do they understand by what is their best? So yeah, when I read your book, I was like, oh, actually, maybe I need to start thinking about what the terminology that I'm using as well. Really interesting.
Yeah. And do what you can within the time available. That's a really useful one to think about. Do what you can within the time available.
And do you think things like social media can make us have these feelings? Because I think some possibly, I mean, you're the expert in this, possibly with imposter phenomenon, well, for me, I often compare myself to other people. I do a lot of like, oh, they look really like they know what they're doing. Where we used to just compare ourselves to the people in our immediate vicinity, now we could be comparing ourselves to the world. Can that exasperate this?
I think so. There's little actual researched evidence that it's increased with social media, but there's an obvious sort of link when you think about the phenomenon and the reason why you're feeling like a fraud, feeling that you don't belong. You look at others and think, well, they've got it all sussed. And the interesting fact is they probably haven't. But what we don't do is we don't talk about the imposter feelings because they're internal, and I don't want to get found out. So I'm not going to say that I'm not good enough. I'm going to keep quiet. I got a distinction for my first academic essay, and I didn't dare ask the university to remark it, but I was so surprised. It's like, how could that happen? And you're really pleased with the result, but then you're also worried that you're not going to be able to maintain that level of success. So you sort of put the bar and put the pressure on more for yourself then. And I used to be in awe of my fellow students in the master's group that would ask these most amazing questions and talk about existential, existence, and these sorts of words that I really hadn't grasped at all. And thankfully, 10 years ago, when I was doing that graduated from my MSc, social media wasn't as prevalent. It did exist, but it wasn't as prevalent. And Twitter, as it was then, was quite a nice space and place to be. Um, I think the social media part has a part to play, but it's not the whole story. I think there's something about how we also internalize and think about ourselves, but definitely the external environment has a part to play. But just coming back to that comparison piece that you mentioned, one of the things with comparing yourself to others, you will always be able to find somebody who's got a better grade, who's got, or did it faster than you, or seemed to swan through and not have to work through the night to be able to get to the exam result that you've managed to get to, or whatever it is, without that level of stress, because they seem to be somehow got it all sorted. You don't know what they're feeling on the inside. And it's a really inaccurate comparison when you're comparing yourself to others. And what we could do differently is start, and I mentioned this in my book, is one of the strategies is start to compare yourself to yourself. Is start to look at what do you know this week that you didn't know last week? And then start to look at, well, what do you know this month that you didn't know last month and this time last year? Go back and look at how you have developed and how you've grown your knowledge, your skills, and your abilities. Because when we think about this term success, we often put successes down to luck or maybe down to hard work. Now, both have a bit to play, but they're not the whole story. Luck and hard work on their own does not success make. We need to have knowledge, skills, and abilities. But what we tend to forget is that they grow over time. So the more accurate comparison would be to compare yourself with yourself and just look back and think about what you now know and then update that view of yourself inside your head.
That's a really good tip. It's, yeah, reflecting back on our own achievements, our own where we've come. And it might not be a big achievement, but just, where we've come, like from yesterday, from last week. I think that's nice, easier steps to take. Just going back to how imposter phenomenon can affect somebody in the workplace, like how could it impact in their maybe the opportunities they go for or in day-to-day life in the workplace? Yeah, what might they experience or what might they stop them doing?
So there's a number of different ways I think it can impact people, and I'm guessing because we're focusing here perhaps in the careers aspect of things. So it can impact people from going for a job or going for promotion. So definitely inhibits. It's called career progression in the academic terminology. It is a known career inhibitor. So you feel like you're not good enough. You feel you've just got to get one more year's experience under your belt, and then you can go for that promotion. So it holds people back from that perspective. I think in the workplace too, it holds people back perhaps from opening up and asking questions in meetings. So it then inhibits creativity, it inhibits brainstorming, it inhibits the I don't know piece, which nobody has answers to everything. Oh, maybe apart from Google or Chat
Well,
GPT.
they
But
sometimes that
you know,
makes it
as
up, doesn't it?
as human beings, we don't have the answers. And actually being able to say, I don't know, or ask a question, tell me what you mean by, is really opening and encouraging and supportive for others. But if you've got imposter feelings, you are very hesitant to let anybody know what you don't know. I'm very hesitant to ask questions and stay quiet. And at the end of a meeting, or a discussion, or even during a meeting, if it's an online one particularly, you can have your phone and you can be doing that Google or Chat GPT questions. What does this mean? Let me get a summary quickly, and then I can pretend I know. And you feel even more like a fraud than you would if you had actually said, I don't know, can you just tell me what that particular part means? Or can you understand so I get a deeper understanding? Can you explain so I get a deeper understanding of what you're talking about here? There are ways of asking the tell me more, could you explain a bit more? Could you describe what you mean by that? Rather than say, I don't know what the bleep you're on about. So we can do that. The other thing that I think in organizations and managers might miss, or maybe even it could be supervisors and academic staff tutoring students, the hard work and the extra effort that is put in. And some people will overwork. It's not good enough, so therefore I'm going to miss the deadline because I don't think it's good enough. And they will procrastinate and try for perfection. And that means then sometimes you get the black mark against your name because you haven't submitted on time. Or in the workplace, I've heard some people say they've probably lost good team members whom they knew were very capable at doing the job, but they were just missing so many deadlines and not performing. And I think that's sad because they didn't realize at that
Mm.
point that it could potentially be the inner imposter thinking holding themselves back. So if you want to pick up on a strategy from that,
Yeah, go
if
for
I
it.
may jump into one, Amanda, and just segue straight into a clue and an idea whilst it's in my mind, it's It's to actually say, when I did my PhD thesis, I used to send my supervisors and term it burblings, because then it wasn't a complete chapter. It was my way of letting it go out early. And I think you don't have to use that same terminology, but I do think sending people drafts, these are my unformed thoughts, or I haven't had the chance to think this through fully yet. What do you think about XYZ? So you're putting out your draft thinking, or speaking your draft thinking, rather than here's what
Yeah.
I've perfected, tell me what you think. And then you get criticized for it, which is how it's received when somebody critiques and suggests that it could be made even better if you did XYZ.
So starting with those drafts, and because I guess having those suggestions to make at that point is going to be more helpful than when you've spent hours on a project or whatever that is, or a piece of writing or something, and then having it completely critiqued.
Yeah, I was going to say, you might be spending hours perfecting the wrong thing. People might say, "Oh, that bit's really good," and you'll go, "Oh, I didn't think that was," and they say, "Well, we need a bit more on X in here." And you go, "Oh, I hadn't thought of that." So you could spend hours perfecting something
Mhm.
and doing the wrong bit, rather than telling somebody, "This is what I've got early doors, let them have a look at it," and then come back and be able to spend your time more productively and effectively.
Great. So perfectionism can be quite an issue when it comes to imposter phenomenon as well. Yeah, quite an
Quite
issue.
an issue, big time, quite an issue. And that's where I think it's really interesting to learn where the bar is. It's learn what good enough is, and
Mhm.
have that aspect of, nobody is perfect. There's another book that I can recommend if you want to put on the notes perhaps to the
Mhm.
episode, but Tal Ben Shahar's book, The Pursuit of Perfect, is a really interesting read on perfectionism. Doesn't mention imposter feelings once, but it's a really interesting read on perfectionism. And it's this piece about, he suggests what we need to work to is optimal functioning. Rather than doing our
Yeah.
best, we work with where is the good enough mark, that optimal functioning, and let it go. And then we have to work with that aspect in mind. And I like the phrase optimal as opposed to perfect.
I like that. Okay. And something else that you talked about in your book was there was a few things is kind of acknowledging maybe feedback that we receive, and like you talk about, which actually something I do is I keep a feedback folder in my on my emails, and any like nice emails, particularly when I've worked with students who have emailed me back to say, yes, I've got that job, or this it's been really helpful, I'll put it in my feedback folder. Tell me a little bit about that, the importance of kind of recognizing positive feedback that we get.
I'm really glad you asked that, because it's one of, I think, one of the key ways, and perhaps even easy ways in some respects, that we can do to tackle our own inner imposter feelings. Because the key thing is, it's this internal feeling despite the evidence of success. Where's the evidence of success? Well, it generally comes in feedback from people, whether it's for academic staff, it's feedback from the students or from colleagues. From students, it might be feedback from your supervisor, your tutor. It might be feedback from your peers as well. But the evidence is there. What we tend to do is go, "Ah, yeah, but they're just saying that." And it's very easy to focus on the one mark that didn't go the way you want it than the other marks that did. And what we need to do is make more effort to focus on the positives, but also not just for when you're going for a job interview. But great that you've got the positive feedback folder, but what you really want to do is not just keep the positive feedback folder and use it for the exceptional situations. You want to use it to help you rethink that view of yourself. So to use the feedback folder is keep all of the things that people say when you've done something well. Key is also, if the feedback is really specific, that is really useful. So if somebody says you've done a great job, but they don't tell you why, you could go back and say, "Could you tell me what specifically made that job great so I can do it next time?" It's not so you can stroke my ego, please, but it is so I can do it next time. And keep that specific feedback, review that specific feedback regularly. And if you really want to challenge the inner thinking, I think that regularly needs to be once a week, once a fortnight, maybe max once a month out. But I think if you do it less frequently than once a month, I think you're not going to be challenging your inner thinking enough. And there's a third step to it, because when you look at the feedback and you are reading the feedback, we have a tendency in our brains to immediately dismiss it and go, oh yes, but if only they knew. And for me, if only they knew the 11 plus, I was the exam that I failed and I went to the local secondary modern school and I don't have a first degree and all of that stuff. If only they knew dot dot dot. And we tend to dismiss it, whereas actually one of the techniques that I've started to use and encourage others to use comes from the school of improvisation, and it's to yes and the feedback instead of but it. So we yes and an offer in improv, where somebody makes the offer to you, you yes and it and you build upon it. So you could do the same inside your head with the positive feedback. So keep it in a folder somewhere, review it regularly. And when you review it, the yes and inside your head sounds something like, yes, and I learnt XYZ from this situation. Yes, and that was tough, but I'm really pleased it came out well. Yes, and I can see this specific bit of feedback is becoming common for people to tell me. So it's one of my strengths now. So you're yes anding the feedback to allow it on the inside and to change your internal perception of yourself, and therefore hopefully diminish the imposter feelings.
It's like those imposter feelings are those little gremlins that are kind of niggling away at you, like the yes but. I feel like they're those gremlins that, and you have to try and quieten them down by putting other thought processes into your brain, really.
Yes, and it's one of those things, if somebody comes and talks to you about their inner gremlins, and you can't say, oh, well, here's the evidence, here's everything that I've got, you're super good at this and you're super good at that, and you're amazing at the other. That's really unhelpful, because A, they've now got your super good to live up to, and B, you're just telling them and they're not going to believe you. But what you could do is ask slightly different questions. So to come back to the taming the gremlins, which is, I think this is the title of a book by Rick Carson, is called Taming Your Gremlin. Another interesting read for people. But if you ask them some questions which went along the lines of, tell me why you're thinking that. Where do you think those thoughts come from? What do you think is the underlying reason for it? And then two, I think, very crucial questions. Tell me what evidence you have that supports your thinking. So tell me what evidence you have to tell that your gremlin is right. And then what evidence do you have to say that that thinking is wrong? What negates the thinking? What evidence do you have that says your gremlin is wrong? And then there will be, if you give people enough time, they will come up with more evidence against the gremlin than for the gremlin, but they haven't internalized it. But you're helping them unpick it rather than just telling them to tell their gremlin to shut up.
And I think that's useful for people who, in my position, who work in careers guidance, and we're seeing people, but also managers in the workplace. They can do, I mean, I know in your book, we won't go into this today, but in your book, you talk a lot about, as managers, how you can help your employees deal with these imposter phenomenon, and things like feedback, giving, not just going, oh, you're doing a great job, actually saying, no, I really like how you've done X, Y, and Z, or so being a bit more specific on that feedback rather than just, oh, it's a great job, which isn't that helpful. Something else that I recognize that you where you talk about in the book, and I recognize this even when I talk about my podcast to people. You said quite often we add caveats in conversation. So in a meeting, we might say, from my knowledge, or I might be wrong, but, or I've done this, but it probably isn't very good. So, and I was reading it going, oh, I recognize this. Like even talking about the podcast, I kind of go, oh, well, it's a very basic podcast. I'm real amateur. And just to kind of, I feel like I want to manage people's expectations of me. So how can we, well, why do we do that? Is that because we are trying to manage the expectations that we think somebody might have of us, or like, and how can we, is it just recognizing that we put those words sometimes as caveats?
I think, again, it's another super good question, Amanda, because what you're doing there, you are absolutely managing other people's expectations, but what you're also doing is very much putting yourself down at the same time. So you're sort of saying, I don't really believe it, it's good enough, but there's a different way of putting it out there. Have a listen, see what you think, let me know. Those sorts of things. It's not saying it's super good, hey, look at me, I'm doing this wonderful podcast. It's not about that. It's saying, have a listen, let me know, see what you think. And I think
Mm,
that's useful. You're not telling them how great it is, but you're also not telling them and dismissing what you're putting out there. I think we do it perhaps because maybe like me, when you're growing up, you're told that nobody likes the smart path. You're told that you shouldn't get too big for your boots, and pride comes before a fall. All of those sorts of patterns that we get imbued within us means that we have to, or we don't have to, but we feel like we should play it small, and we feel like we shouldn't talk about our successes. Now, I don't think we have to talk about our successes to the big wide world. We don't have to go, hey, look at me, I've done all of these wonderful things. But I do think we could talk about them more kindly in our own heads and accept them more and say, no, I am good at this. And owning and knowing what you're good at comes back to owning and playing to your strengths. But also, we know that we're not good at a whole load of other things, and that's okay too. So for me, it's about this acceptance and of knowing what you're good at, knowing what you're not so good at, and being okay with both.
mm, mm. I think that's good. And I think having that time to sometimes reflect, which we don't always have, time to reflect and maybe look, like you started at the beginning, kind of talking about, where have I come, what have I achieved this week, and doing almost a bit of an audit of maybe if you've started a new job and you're 7 months in and you're feeling like still that fraud, I guess doing an audit of actually what have I done, writing it on paper, reflecting on it. And it's a bit like, when I can't remember if you talked about writing a CV sometimes, just to getting it all down.
That was exactly what was going in my mind. One of my participants did mention that piece. I love the phrase when you're saying doing an audit. I think that's a really useful phrase to do. So, it's a check in with yourself, audit where you are. It's much more objective when you're doing an audit. That phrasing gives you that objectivity. And one of my research participants talked about applying for a job that everybody said he should apply for. And he sort of, oh, no, 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 no. But he got all of the encouragement, wrote his CV out, and found just writing the CV was really useful. He didn't get the job, but he found the process of writing out the CV very useful for him then understanding what his current knowledge, skills, and abilities were. And I think that's the thing, we tend to hang on to what we don't know rather than recognize what we do know now.
I
Yeah.
think that's probably something really good for students, maybe even students to currently be doing that whilst at university, where they might have positions of responsibility. So being in a society, a member of a society, and or a president of a society, or having a part-time job, and just keeping that record of things that they've done and how far they're coming whilst at university, and then continue that. Having that on a CV actually is really useful because you're always going to need a CV, and then when they graduate, getting a job, just keeping that record of what they've done, what they've achieved, what projects they've been involved in, what skills they've developed.
Yeah. And I was going to say, and the achievements can be small as well. They don't have to be big. They can be volunteering at something, volunteering to be a student
Mm.
ambassador, for instance, or something like that. Or the achievements can be speaking up in one of the lectures and asking a question. They can be small achievements as well as big achievements, but they're things that for you were significant at that point. And that reflexivity piece, that opportunity to go back and keep track of what you've been doing, and you don't have to put it all in a CV then, of course, but it's really useful to have that for when you're asked questions at interviews and you've got something in your mind of, oh, yes, I did da 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 da. And actually, I'm able to formulate and ask questions that elicit answers that engage other people and have debates and discussions or whatever it might happen to be that you want to bring to the fore. But I do think keeping that recognition of what you've done is good. There's something else interesting with the imposter feelings, though, because we can still diminish our own actions, whereas the imposter feelings get more assuaged and diminished by what other people see us do. So, confidence is often built by reflecting and looking at what you've achieved on the inside, but the imposter feelings is somebody else's external objective view of how good you are. And that's just a slight difference there that I think is also really important to keep in mind when we're looking at overcoming the imposter feelings. So both is really good.
Okay. So, I mean, we're coming kind of to the end really, but final tips of people to help manage these imposter feelings, which might also result in building confidence, I guess, which is good for our students who maybe have self-doubt and lack of confidence. But we want to kind of distinguish the two. But, what could people, any other further tips that you feel like anyone could be doing to just banish those imposter feelings or manage them?
I think the thing to recognize is that it's not an easy fix. It's sometimes the external environment that you find yourself in that might be the trigger for the imposter feelings. It might be somebody else's comment that isn't supportive, that means that you literally feel like you don't belong. And those ones you can't do anything about. So it's almost focusing on what you can do something about, and having that ability to bring yourself to this set of, okay, I've got this external evidence that says that I'm really good. Oh, and then it can be really difficult and very, what's the word I'm looking for? Awkward. It can be really uncomfortable to say, yes, I am that person that other people see. And one aspect of my research was involved in psychological courage, in that taking the positive psychological courage to update the view of yourself. And those are quite big words to end on. So I'm going to succinct, sort of bring that into something more succinct, and to say that you need to be courageous to accept how good you are now, and then continue to update that view of yourself. And sometimes it's uncomfortable, needs some courage to update the view of yourself in the future too, to how good you are then in the future. But to me, I'm going to end with three words and just give people this opportunity to say it's your time to shine.
Lovely. Well, thank you so much. I mean, I could actually talk with you for a long, long time. I could talk to you for hours. It's been really, really interesting. I would recommend your book. Your book is brilliant. It's very easy to read. It explains things in a really nice way with examples. So for anyone interested in learning more about imposter phenomenon, then do get your book, which is called The Imposter Phenomenon: Why You Feel Like a Fraud and What to Do About It. Thank you so much.
Thank you. My pleasure. Thanks, Amanda.
Thank you for listening today. Please remember to subscribe and follow so you can keep up to date with all new episodes.